Hi, special thanks to Dean Bartoli for your tireless work and dedication to eradicating the scourge of human trafficking. Deep thanks as well to all the assembled leaders for your amazing commitment and effectiveness in this human rights and humanitarian cause. And frankly, words are inadequate to thank Nobel Peace Prize laureate Nadia Murad for her courage, tenacity, resiliency, and witness against genocide. She not only heroically overcame unthinkable personal trauma, but she focused world attention and galvanized world opinion on slavery and slaughter by ISIS against the Yazidis. As the prime author of the Iraq and Syria Genocide Relief and Accountability Act of 2018, which provides humanitarian, stabilization, and recovery assistance to victims of genocide, especially Yazidis and Christians, I truly thank Nadia for her extraordinary work. It truly was and is inspiring. 20 years ago, at the 1999 Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, Parliamentary Assembly in St. Petersburg, Russia, I sponsored the first human trafficking resolution designed to encourage over 300 members of Congress and parliamentarians from 57 countries to develop policies to prevent trafficking in all of its ugly manifestations, to rescue and protect victims, and to prosecute, convict, and jail traffickers. 1 year later, the United States Congress approved and the President signed legislation that I authored, known as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, a comprehensive, whole-of-government policy to combat these barbaric crimes in the United States and around the world. As part of that, and pursuant to that law, on June 20th, U.S. Secretary of State Michael Pompeo released the 2019 Trafficking in Persons Report, a global analysis and ranking of every country, including the United States. Combating human trafficking is and will always be a team effort, requiring cooperation at every level and across borders. Again, at the OSCE Parliamentary Assemblies, as the Special Representative on Human Trafficking, I've offered 20 resolutions over the years, which the PA has approved, each focusing on new and effective strategies to be merged with each nation's ongoing work. At the July OSCE PA in Luxembourg, for example, I sponsored a special resolution designed to encourage lawmakers to educate their school children on how to avoid human trafficking. After a great debate, it passed. As you may know, this past January, I authored legislation that was signed into law, my fifth major law on human trafficking, known as the Frederick Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Act. The new law honors the extraordinary legacy of one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. Working with Frederick Douglass's great-great-grandson, Kenneth Morris, we crafted a new initiative designed to better ensure that school-aged children are educated in the classroom to recognize, resist, and report any attempt to recruit or coerce them into the cruel world of human trafficking. Title I of the Frederick Douglass Act authorizes the U.S. government, led by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education, to provide grants to local education agencies in partnership with NGOs to establish, expand, and to support those programs. And these programs do this: provide age-appropriate information to students on how to avoid becoming victims of sex and labor trafficking, and secondly, to educate school staff to recognize and respond to signs of sex and labor trafficking. Of course, you all know all too well that the need for educating the children and training school officials is absolutely compelling. And a breakout panel 1 today will focus on this very issue. Again, according to the ILO, 1 in 4 trafficking victims are children. As you know, women and girls disproportionately affected by forced labor, and they account for most of the victims in the commercial sex industry. Traffickers exploit children due to their lack of awareness about the threat, and a child's vulnerability can be compounded by poverty, a previous history of abuse and neglect, institutionalization, running away from home, being an unaccompanied minor, having a physical and/or mental disability, belonging to a minority group, lacking citizenship or birth registration, being an asylum seeker, refugee, or an internally displaced person. So today, as never before, we're finding traffickers are using internet communication technologies, or ICTs, to lure children into this nefarious world of trafficking. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a study that they had done, the average age of online enticement that could result in being trafficked was 15. A number of NGOs have developed school courses, as you know. Those 21st century solutions need to be aggressively implemented. That we can't lose a moment on this. Like you, I believe that we don't have that moment to lose in educating our children, but also the teachers, so that they become part of the solution. Finally, allow me a brief word about International Megan's Law, a law designed to significantly thwart child sexual exploitation in the United States and abroad through a comprehensive and efficient system that warrants law enforcement of traveling sex offenders. I first introduced International Megan's Law back in 2018. It passed the House 4 times, 2010, 14, 15, and 16. And finally, the Senate passed it in 2016, and it was signed into law. Megan Kanka of Hamilton Township, New Jersey, which is my hometown, was just 7 years old when she was kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered in 1994. Her assailant lived across the street. Unbeknownst to her family and other residents in the neighborhood, he was a convicted repeat sex offender and a predator. We know from law enforcement and media documentation that Americans on the U.S. sex offender registries are caught sexually abusing children in Asia, Central and South America, Europe, and frankly, everywhere. A deeply disturbing 2010 report by the GAO found that at least 4,500 U.S. passports were issued to registered sex offenders in fiscal year 2008 alone. Typically, a passport is valid for 10 years, meaning some or many of these of the tens of thousands of registered sex offenders possessing passports may be on the prowl internationally, looking to exploit and to abuse. International Megan's Law requires the passport of a convicted sex offender to carry this endorsement. In other words, when they get to a border, the officials there will open that up and it will say this: the bearer was convicted of a sex offense against a minor and is a covered sex offender pursuant to 22 United States Code Section 212C1. The law is working. In just 2 years, 10,541 covered sex offenders had been noticed by the U.S. government to foreign countries, and 3,681 individuals, as of July, who were convicted of sex crimes against children, were denied entry into those nations. We are encouraging other governments around the world to establish their own national and international Megan's Law. Again, there's so much to be done, and I thank all of you for being at this very important conference at Seton Hall to make a difference.